Last week we talked a little about Orthodox Christianity in the sense of what happens when you die. And one of the things that we saw about Orthodox Christianity is that they did not ever adopt what's called the doctrine of original sin. Now, if you'll remember, the doctrine of original sin was developed by a man named Augustine about 400 years after the time of Jesus. It was adopted by Christianity in the West, but not the East. And so just to put that in perspective, Augustine developed the doctrine of original sin about as long after the time of Jesus as we live since the Pilgrims first came over on the Mayflower. So you just think how long it's been since the Pilgrims came over and how everything's changed. That's how long after Jesus Augustine developed original sin. There was a lot of time there. And last week we saw how the doctrine of original sin led Western Christianity to adopt a certain view of everything, and how Orthodox Christianity, without that, adopted a different view. Now, the whole basis of Christianity, the whole idea of why Jesus came and what he did, whether you're talking about from the Protestant and Roman Catholic side on one side or the Orthodox perspective on the other, it doesn't matter. Both of those come from how Genesis chapter 3 is interpreted. You know, really, the interpretation of Genesis chapter 3 lays a foundation upon which all of the rest of Christianity is built. And we heard that for our reading this morning. That's where Adam and Eve ate the fruit that God told them not to eat. All of Christianity, and all the various forms of it, hinges on that. Because that's the foundation. How you interpret Jesus will depend on how you interpret that. It's the starting point. So I thought today would be more interesting for some of you that seem to be interested in original sin last week to talk about it. Augustine's idea of original sin is the foundation upon which all other Protestant and Catholic beliefs are built. Now, we've probably heard original sin, original sin, original sin all of our lives, but we've really probably never looked at it deeply. So I think it's interesting to do that. Briefly stated, the doctrine of original sin says that when Adam and Eve ate the fruit, God told them not to eat. God punished them and punished all humanity that would ever come after them by changing human nature. God changed human nature, so from that point on, all human beings would be 100% evil. 100%. Capable of nothing but sin. So why are we sinners? Because that's how God made us. We sin because God made us sinners. But Augustine went further, and Augustine said that even though God made us so we can't help but sin, God still holds us responsible for it, and God has decided the punishment for sin is an eternity in horrible torments and hell. Augustine came up with that based on how he interpreted Genesis chapter 3. So it's interesting to look at Augustine and who he was. He was born in the year 354 in what is now the nation of Algeria in northwest Africa. When he was a young teenager, he discovered he had a very strong sex drive. He engaged in all kinds of sexual activity. This pleased his father. His father was sort of proud of him for being a sexual dynamite, but his mother thought it was disgraceful. When Augustine was in his late teens, his father died. He became very close to his mother. But eventually he got some woman pregnant, had a child. Started living with that woman, but kept continuing his sexual escapades. His mother always remained a very close part of his life. She often lived with him. She tried to get him to give the sex stuff up, but he wouldn't do it. He moved to various places over the years trying to escape his mother, but she would always follow him. Now, Augustine's mother was a Christian. She pressured him to become a Christian, but he had no interest. Eventually, he expressed a little interest in Christianity, and his mother tried to encourage him to settle down. She arranged a marriage for him to a young girl. But this young girl was too young yet for marriage. Augustine wasn't going to give up sex, so he ditched the engagement and he got another, started going around again. Now, then at some point later, and we don't know exactly when, he decided to convert to Christianity. He got rid of his girlfriends and founded a monastic community. That was back during the time of Christianity, but a lot of people would go off and found these little monastic communities out in the desert. You know, we've talked before about what's called the Desert Fathers movement, where people would go out there and just live in the desert. But right before he was going to leave to do that, something happened between him and his mother. And we don't know exactly what it was. He described it in colorful terms. He and his mother were standing at a window. They were talking intimately, and something happened. He described them as being transported through the heavenly realm. He talked about it in terms of panting and trusting. And he says they reached a moment of ecstasy together and then returned with a sigh. A few days later, his mother was dead. We don't know how she died or the circumstances of her death. But that incident that happened with his mother a few days before her death, plus her death, had a profound effect on Augustine. He blamed it on sex. He vowed to renounce sex for good. Now, he felt that sex had controlled him all his life. It was a burning desire within him, and he had no control over it. And he thought back over his life how he had always gained such great pleasure from sex, and that bothered him. He couldn't control it, but he felt he should. He felt he should be able to control his own body, but he couldn't. And so he set out to understand why. And he eventually decided that sexual desire, the fact that we have it, indicates that there is something fundamentally wrong with us at our core. The fact that we cannot turn sexual desire off indicated to Augustine that there is something fundamentally evil at the core of each one of us. He did not believe God would create people to enjoy such a disgusting thing. He did not believe that God would create people to have a sex drive and get pleasure from it. So he decided the sex drive is a mark of evil. And the enjoyment of sex is evil. It is a reflection of the evil at our core. It is, he said, a result of a curse that's put on us. If we enjoy something that's so disgusting, and if we desire something that's so disgusting, if we can't turn it off, then we ourselves must be evil. Somehow or another, evil has gotten into the core of our being. But why? He went to Genesis chapter 3, where Adam and Eve ate the fruit. And he noticed something there. It says, their eyes were open. Now, obviously, it didn't mean they were blind before they could eat the fruit, because if you read before them, they obviously could see. I mean, he said Eve saw that it was good for food. But what he meant by that was, Augustine said, their eyes were open, and for the first time they saw each other's sexual organs with desire. After they ate the fruit, God put a curse on them, and this curse made them have sexual desire. The curse made the sex act pleasurable, which would only increase the desire to do it. But that's not how they were before they ate the fruit. It was the result of a curse God put on them. So Augustine decided that the sex drive and the pleasure derived from it are the design of something fundamentally evil at our core. That was the curse God put on us in response for Adam and Eve eating fruit. But Augustine went much further than that, and he said, God not only did that, God also came in and changed everything. Before Adam and Eve ate the fruit, the earth was a paradise. There was no death, no sickness, no pain, no heartache. There was no bad weather, no extremes of hot and cold. It was living in paradise every day. Animals didn't eat and kill each other. Snakes didn't bite you. Spiders didn't bite you. Coyotes didn't kill little rabbits. None of that happened. There was no evil, no suffering, no death. It was just like living in heaven. But because Adam and Eve ate that one piece of fruit, God introduced evil into the world. God introduced sickness and death and pain. God introduced natural disasters like tornadoes and hurricanes, earthquakes, droughts and famines, cold, freezing weather, and extremes of hot weather. Animals started killing and eating each other. Snakes started biting people. God introduced this into the world. Life began to exist, you see, on death. Life existed by consuming and eating, killing other life. The cat lives because it kills and eats the mouse. The spider lives because it kills and eats the fly. And so God changed everything so that life began to exist upon death. You see, death became the means by which life perpetrates itself. All because Adam and Eve ate the piece of fruit. Now that's the short version of what Augustine came up with, and it was soon adopted by the Roman Catholic Church. Why, though, was it adopted by Christianity and Italy? Well, during that time, the church, organized Christianity, was about 100 years old, that the Roman Emperor Constantine had created. And remember, Christianity was an arm of the Roman government. The church officials derived their power and their wealth from the government. In fact, that was their only source of power and wealth. But during that 100 years, there had been a number of different Roman emperors, and some of the emperors wasn't as enamored with the church as Constantine had been. Some of the emperors didn't really like the church at all. And when you get up to the 400s, during Augustine's time, the Roman government had begun to weaken dramatically. And the church authorities began to realize that if the Roman government failed, they would fall too. They needed power independent of the Roman government. They found it with Augustine. You see, Augustine said that original sin is something you're born with. It's how God made you. That even though God made you a sinner, He's still going to burn you in hell for all eternity because you sin. And Augustine said there's one way out, though. Baptism, done by the proper church authorities in the Roman Church, will remove original sin from you, and then you can go to heaven. The only way you can avoid going to hell for eternity is to be baptized by the Roman Church. That's the only way. And that's exactly what the church was looking for. You see, Augustine had just placed into their lap all the power they could ever need, because they had the power to determine your eternal destiny. It was them who decided whether you went to heaven or hell. If they gave you their baptism, you could go to heaven. If they refused to give you their baptism, you would burn in hell for all eternity. All eternity. So you can see what power that gave them and why they adopted Augustine's idea of original sin. At this time, in the 400s, Christian beliefs, official Christian beliefs, according to the Roman Catholic Church, were just beginning to be developed, and they made that the cornerstone, and they built their beliefs on that. And since Protestant Christianity came out of Roman Catholic Christianity, it's what was passed down to Protestants also. Protestants, though, just disagreed with one little point of it. Catholics believe that original sin is removed by baptism by the Catholic Church. Protestants believe that when you become a Christian and have faith in Jesus, that removes the original sin from you. So that was the disagreement between Protestants and Catholics. So the Roman Church was looking for a source of power independent of the Roman government, and it found it in a man named Augustine, a guy who came up with it because he got disgusted with some of the things he had done sexually in his life, and he despised sex. And he said sex and the desire for it is the mark of evil in our core. And the rest is history. So you see, this idea says that there is something fundamentally evil inside each one of us. That who you are, first of all, at the core of your being, is an evil sinner, polluted, disgusting. John Calvin come along during the Protestant Reformation and say that the stench of our sin is nauseating to God. So who you are at the core of your being is a stinking, nauseating sin. Who you are. Why is there suffering and death in the world? Why do hogs reach down and grab birds and rip them apart? Because that's what God decreed as punishment for Adam and Eve eating the fruit. What kind of picture of God does that paint? I want to contrast that with another way of looking at it. Let's say God told Adam and Eve not to eat a piece of fruit because he knew that if they did, something would come into the picture that God knew would be bad. God knew there was something out there that wanted to come in, and the only way it could come in is if Adam and Eve ate that fruit. And so God said, don't touch it. See, God didn't want that to be able to come in. He didn't want that in the world. He wanted to keep it out. And so he told Adam and Eve, don't eat that fruit. In fact, don't even touch it. Now, why was it there in the first place? We don't know. It was just there. But Adam and Eve ate it. And whatever it was that was contained in there got released into the world. And it actually got the upper hand. and all kind of bad things got released into the world. And God immediately went to work to push that out and neutralize it, but it was hard. Something that would take a long, long time to do, and something that to accomplish would be very costly to God. But God did it. In Jesus, he achieved the decisive victory over that, the victory over death. He secured the victory and broke the chains of death. And he freed all humanity from the grasp of evil. But it would take, even after that, a lot more work and effort on God's part until it was finally vanquished completely and all were completely free of its grasp, until all creation was free of its grasp. Paul says that all creation groans in anticipation of being delivered. And that will eventually happen. You see, in this view, God sees the two people he made make a big mistake. They made a big mistake. A lot of y'all are parents in here. Did your children ever make a really big mistake? I bet they all did. What you do when they make big mistakes? I guarantee you went in there and tried to help them correct it, didn't you? That's what you did. You went in there and you said, well, no. You did what you could to help them correct it. God did that too. God was merciful, and God looked down in pity on the people. And looked down in pity on the world that he had made, and he said, I just can't stand to see this. I can't stand by and let all this happen. I've got to do something. And so he went to work as our Savior, as our rescuer, the hero who saves the day. And why did he do it? Because he can't stand to see us suffer. Because he can't stand to see his creation suffer. Is it easy for God to do it? No, it's not. He has to struggle, and it costs him. He has to suffer himself in order to accomplish it. But he does. No different than every one of you's probably done for your own children. No different whatsoever. So we've seen two pictures of God today. Which God do you think it is? Which picture of God do you think is closer to the way things really are? I already know which one I'd go for.